Good evening. I'd like to welcome the City of Milton Police Chaplain Remco Bromlett, who will lead us in our invocation.
Good evening. I invite you to join me in prayer as you please. Our God in heaven, we begin tonight by coming before you in confession of our need for you. We have an awful and an awesome responsibility, our God, to govern a piece of land that you have given to us. And so we ask for your favor, your grace, your wisdom upon the council tonight. Supernatural wisdom to make the kind of decisions that benefit the citizens of the town of Milton. And we join together in asking you for grace and favor on this city and its citizens. We pray for its well-being, for their well-being, for favor and for prosperity, for peace, and for the absence of crime in many ways. And we ask that tonight your presence would grace this meeting. We pray that you fill this room with your presence and every heart with a sense of connectedness to you tonight as decisions are being made, as discussions are being held. Help us to remember that we are your servants and we are your stewards. And we pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Milton City Council for Monday, August 17th, 2009 to order. Will the city clerk please call the roll and make general announcements?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll be happy to call roll for the August 17th, 2009 regular meeting. However, I would like to remind those in attendance to please silence all cell phones at this time. Additionally, those attending the meeting who would like to provide public comment, either during the public hearings or a call for public comment, we do ask that you complete a public comment card prior to speaking on that item. There is no public comment for consent agenda items or items under first presentation. Those called to speak will be taken in order that the speaker cards were received by City Clerk staff. All speakers will identify themselves by name, address, and organization if applicable. When you hear the bell, you will have 30 seconds to complete your remarks. The City Council may allow public comment on an agenda item or general public comment from a representative of such an organized group or association, provided, however, that such individual has the authority to speak on behalf of that organization. We would ask that you complete a notarize, and we will notarize an affidavit that you have that authority. Demonstration of any sort within the chamber is prohibited, so please refrain from any applause, cheering, booing, outbursts, or dialogue with any person speaking. Please show the same respect to the person speaking that you would expect to receive yourself. As I call roll, please confirm your attendance. Mayor Joe Lockwood.
Here.
Councilmember Karen Thurman.
Here.
Councilmember Julie Zonner Bailey.
Here.
Councilmember Bill Lusk.
Here.
Councilmember Bert Hewitt.
Here.
Councilmember Tina D'Aversa.
Here.
Councilmember Alan Tart.
Here.
Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, will the city clerk please sound the next item?
Our first item is approval of the meeting agenda, agenda item number 09910. Staff would like to add an executive session to discuss potential land acquisition and pending litigation.
Is there any other items to be considered?
Yes, sir, Mayor, if I can. I would like to remove agenda item number 09-919, approval of a resolution relating to the recommended location for the Milton Library, although I reserve the right to consider that in a future meeting.
Okay, is there any other items?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the agenda with the modification as noted by Councilmember Tart.
I'll second it.
Do you want to go ahead and include the executive session?
That's what I was going to say, and including the executive session.
Is that a second, Councilmember Thurman? Okay. Got a motion by Councilmember D'Aversa, second by Councilmember Thurman. Is there any discussion? Hearing none.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Okay, next item is public comment. Public comment is a time for citizens to share information with the mayor and city council and to provide input on and opinions on any matter that is not scheduled for its own public hearing during today's meeting. There's no discussion on items on the consent agenda or first presentation from the public or the council. Each citizen who chooses to participate in public comment must complete a comment card and submit it to our city clerk. Please remember this is not a time to engage the mayor or members of the city council in conversation. When your name is called, please step forward and speak into the microphone stating your name and address for the record. You'll have 5 minutes for the remarks. Do we have any public comment?
Yes, sir. Mr. Bill Anderson.
Mayor and Council, if I could real quick, while Mr. Anderson is coming forward and for the benefit of the public, I just want everybody to remember we're streaming this meeting and we've had some comments that it's been difficult to hear the audio at times. So if you are speaking tonight, please do in fact speak clearly into the microphone. That might help us out, give us a better test.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is William Anderson. I live at 565 Kensington Farms Drive in Milton, and I'm here tonight to speak on the just removed resolution concerning the Milton Public Library siting. My concern is that we need to take the politics out of this recommendation. It should be based, a decision should be based strictly on the demographics of Milton, where the population centers are, where the schools are, and how the public may best be served. Let's get rid of politics and let's get down to the business of doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Buck Bell.
Good evening. I'm Buck Bell, 13225 Bethany Road, Milton, Georgia. I couldn't have said it better. I felt like that's what I was going to say. But I do want to support y'all's thinking on this project. And as I always do when I stand up here, is I always look at Crabapple as somewhere that I think is not only near and dear to me, but near and dear to the city. It's one of the only places we have out here like this. We have a great opportunity to make it into something special. We got an opportunity to make it into our flagship. And I'm hoping that things that come around once in a lifetime, like libraries and developers that want to put in city centers and bring that type of culture and environment to our city, that we all can hang our hats on regardless of where it is in our city, will always be looked fondly upon by everybody at this table as the best product and the best location, so we all benefit from it. Like Bill said, let's keep the partisanship out of this. Let's make the right decisions. And I appreciate y'all's help.
Thank you.
Mr. Leon Cole, Jr.
Good evening. My name is Leon Cole, 16700 Birmingham Highway, Milton, Georgia. I, too, would have two things to talk about. First, the library. I want to make sure that you all are aware of the, I think it's 116 acres on Freemanville Road that the Board of Education owns, and what was going to be a place for a high school and a middle school, but now we know that the high school won't be there and it leaves a middle school. I've heard that the Board of Education is going to sell off the remaining land, and I would like to suggest that consideration be given to that spot, those extra acres there, for the library. It's centrally located. That is that Freemanville Road area, close to the bridge there, is the dead center of Milton. You can get out a map and you can see that. And it's not on transportation now, but that library is going to be around, if wherever it's built, for 50, 100 years, whatever. And who knows what kind of transportation thing we are going to have in the future. And so I would like to for you to please consider that. I know that you don't make the final decision on it, but if you make a proclamation, and I was kind of glad to see that proclamation removed tonight, to consider my aspect of the thing. The second thing is the city center, or civic center, whatever you want to call it. It's my pleasure to go to Duluth and see what they had over there. And also I went to Swanee. I was looking at fountains. But I tell you the truth, I think that if you have not gone to the city center in Duluth or Swanee, but mostly Duluth, that city hall is just absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful. And the striking thing about that city center is the green space that it has. It has a stage. They have outdoor concerts and all kinds of things there, with the kids playing fountain there and all. And that place, they tell me, is just swamped over on weekends particularly, and daycare centers go there and all. And if we could, whatever we do, if we can have a city hall and a city center with green space that is very pleasant to look at, and it's not jammed into commercial stuff too much, then I think that we'll be on the right track. I'd like to see you come up with something even better than the Duluth City Hall. And I would encourage you, if you have not seen Suwanee City Center, I think they call it, not Duluth one, but particularly, I urge you to go there and take a look at that. You will enjoy the trip, and you will enjoy what you see, and it will give you some idea of what we should do and maybe even surpass it. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
That completes public comment, sir.
Okay. And just as a conversation, not that addressing any public comment, but those two city halls that were mentioned are city halls that staff and I have visited, and they should be very proud of those. Okay, I'm going to move on to the consent agenda. Will the city clerk please sound the next item?
Item number 1, approval of the July 27th special called work session minutes, agenda item number 09911. Item number 2, approval of the August 3rd, 2009 regular meeting minutes, agenda item number 09912. Item number 3, approval of financial statements for the period ending July 2009, agenda item number 09913. Item number 4 is ratification of a release from Fulton County, Georgia, agenda item number 09914.
Okay, do I have a motion and a second?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second. Got a motion by Councilmember Hewitt, second by Councilmember Lusk. Any discussion? Hearing none.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Okay, moving on to reports and presentations. Will the city clerk please sound the next item?
We have a presentation and questions, answers relating to the new library in Milton. Mr. John Zabo is with us, who's the director of Atlanta Fulton Public Library System.
And I'm going to allow Councilmember Diaversa to introduce John. I do want to thank you for being here tonight, and also open it up to questions from council to John to give us a little insight on how the library board works and whatnot. But go ahead, Councilmember Diaversa.
And I just wanted to thank you as well, John. We had some emails, actually quite a number of emails circulating to the council and throughout the city about the library, because we're all rightly so very, very excited about it. You know, you heard earlier from some public comment, and there's a lot of folks, a lot of buzz in the city. So you should be very proud, John, because I think, you know, generating the public interest is what this is all about, and what you're actually here for to talk about tonight is to answer some questions, some things that I didn't think it was really the council's position to make comment on, but rather for John to come and you know, speak, and hopefully a lot of people are watching tonight that have some questions about what the specifications are for the library, what the library board looks for, what they'd like to hear from you with regard to the library about. And we just really thank you very much for coming down and meeting with us. And we also thank you very much and the entire board for selecting Milton to have a library. So first and foremost, we're thrilled to have a library. And, and secondly, we'd love to know exactly from your perspective what the community needs to know about this process, and then, you know, open it up for questions from my fellow council members. So thank you for being here.
Certainly. Thank you very much, and thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to be here in the city of Milton, and also it's a pleasure to be having this conversation and to be able to talk about a new 25,000 square foot branch library for Milton. And there is some question as to whether that's real in reality, so let me clear it up. It is indeed coming. It's not a question mark. No one's waiting around to make a decision as to whether or not there will be a new library here. Very early on in the planning process and developing a library facility master plan, which really occurred in 2007, 2008, it was very evident early on that we had not and were not doing a good job of providing library service in the geography of Milton, nor, frankly, Alpharetta. And so a new 25,000 square foot library was recommended, and frankly, there was no controversy or issue as it moved through our library board of trustees, which is a wonderful group of folks, and we have representatives from this area on that board, and also through the Board of Commissioners of Fulton County. Again, not a controversial issue, so that was terrific to see. And of course, the funding for a new library here and the other new libraries that we'll be building as part of this effort was approved by voters on November the 4th of 2008 in their approval of the library bond referendum. There are 10 projects in the first phase of the library's facility master plan that voters approved, and the Milton Library is one of them. All of these projects are collectively the priority. There is not one over another, and that will be a challenging task, but one that we're ready to manage in seeing all of these projects move forward simultaneously. The first steps, there are a number of first steps in this process. One of the first is bringing program management on board. As you know, when school districts and others go forth to build a huge number of projects and a large scope of work, they bring program management on. And an RFP was issued in early May. Responses came back in early July to bring a program management team on board for the county to manage this first phase. The total project cost, everything included, furniture and land acquisition, construction, is $167 million for all 10 of those projects. So huge scope, and we're very anxious to bring program management on board to not only help us to some degree with site selection, but also in developing the process to select architects and engineers and the rest of the process. And one thing I also want to mention is that, and you mentioned this as well, is that involvement from citizens has really been the hallmark of this entire process. And it has been a process that has been, I think, characterized by a lack of controversy, and I think a lot of that is because we really did seek citizen input, and I think everyone made decisions looking at what the needs were in the communities we were serving and using very good criteria. Another major effort, and one that others spoke to earlier, is site selection, and we are very anxious to complete that process. I think we're in the early stages of it, but very much want to do that because we don't want site selection to delay the next step, which of course is design and then on through construction. Our library board, a group obviously instrumental in this entire process, has adopted, and they adopted in April, a set of site selection criteria. And these are items like we want to build a library that obviously has easy pedestrian access and for bicycles and for easy ingress and egress from vehicular traffic, proximity to schools, public transportation if it's available. There are a number of items on this list. A number of acres needed for a 25,000 square foot or a 10,000 or a 15 and so forth. That site selection criteria can be found on the library's website, which is AFPLS for Atlanta Fulton Public Library System .org, or you can just Google the library system and find it easily. Also, our library board has adopted a site selection process, which also is available to citizens and others there. To see what that process is. The very first step in that formal process was a 30-day period during July where we formally asked citizens and gave citizens the opportunity to suggest specific sites. And one of the things that I've tried to emphasize to everyone in this process, and particularly in the last week of July and the week following, is that that is not the end of public input into this process. We simply wanted to have a formal period where folks could suggest specific sites. We're always welcoming of input, and we will be back to the community when it's time to do what is another big first step, and that's developing the building programs, those documents that we will hand off to our architect and engineering teams that talk about what we want out of the branch library. What we're not going to do with this process, and I think a mistake that has been made in the past, is we're not going to create a prototype design and plop it into each of the communities where we're going to build a 25,000 square foot library. We really want each of the branch libraries we're building to specifically speak to each community, those community needs. And frankly, what folks in Milton here are going to want and expect out of their new branch library is going to be very different than what folks in Northwest Atlanta are telling us and what folks in Palmetto are telling us. So we really want that input, and we will be back to engage citizens and get input on that. And then, of course, architect and engineer selection, which I don't think is going to occur any earlier than early 2010. We want the program management folks to come on board to be able to give us a more tight timeline so that we really can talk in terms of when one might see ribbon cutting and when groundbreaking might occur. We don't have that now, but generally speaking, I think 2010 very much will be a year, the bulk of which will be devoted to design, and I think 2011 can really be looked to as a year of construction and then openings thereafter. So that is essentially where we are, and there is an opportunity for citizens to provide input, suggestions, what they'd like to see out of their library on the library's website. And again, I mentioned that criteria and process that is also there. And I will tell you already we've had a great deal of input from your citizens, which is really good news, and it's welcome, and it's terrific to see, and we always welcome it. So with that, I thank you very much, and again, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
John, again, thank you very much for being here. What would you expect and recommend as a city or city council, other than the fact, when we get feedback to pass it on or recommend that they go to you guys? Is there anything else that you would expect us as a city to do or take any action?
I don't think we're absolutely expecting the city to formally make a recommendation onto our library board. It would certainly be welcome if the city did have a formal opinion on where, even generally, you'd like to see the library located in your community. And I'm glad you asked that question. Just to mention, ultimately this process will result in our library board of trustees discussing where best to locate each of the libraries, and then them ultimately making a recommendation of a single site onto the Fulton County Board of Commissioners, who will make the final decision. And that's important for folks to know, too.
Questions from council? Bill?
Mr. Table, thanks for coming over here. I don't want to appear absurd or be insulting, but I recall from what went on with the OC Library, Robert Fulton Library, there was an issue with furnishing books for that library at that time. So just to confirm that these new libraries are going to be fitted out with fixtures, furnishings, and equipment and books, and what other media devices out there too. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think we did a very good job in putting together the project budgets prior to the bond referendum. And I know famous last words, but I think one of our challenges will be to squeeze as much scope out of these project budgets as we can. I think given the economy and construction and other factors, I think we'll be able to build really fantastic branch libraries. But to directly answer your question, yes, the project budgets were soup to nuts and did include new collections, fixtures, furnishings, equipment, even the 1% for public art was included in the budgets, as it should be.
Commendable.
And I certainly don't want or expect to have the issues that we had with OC, with these projects.
Any other council questions?
I have one. Thank you very much for coming, John. We really appreciate it. I know there's going to be a library location in Alpharetta too, and I know that within individual cities, whether it be Alpharetta or Milton, there may be a good place for that particular city. But I know also that you probably wouldn't want to put a library within a mile from one another. So is there going to be some consideration given to the location of where the Alpharetta Library is in conjunction to the Milton Library to provide, I guess, accessibility to citizens that would be equidistant to both cities?
Yes, and the new library for Alpharetta is a 25,000 square foot library that will be replacing the existing 10,000 square foot library there at Mayfield and Canton. And I think that our board, in making their recommendations to the Board of Commissioners, don't want to make each decision in a vacuum and independent of another. I think where we locate Milton and where we locate Alpharetta should inform the decision on the other. And I think there are certain locations that will be under consideration for Alpharetta that will be very good news for residents of certain areas of Milton, and likewise for Milton for residents of Alpharetta and even Roswell and Johns Creek for that matter. So I think each decision is not done without thinking about the other.
Right. So just so I'm clear, so that library will not be, it's not going to be the existing site. That library will be gone.
No, there has been some discussion of trying to locate the library, and there are a few people, very few, who think that a 25,000 square foot library could go on that site, but most are skeptical. The existing library and associated parking, it's a very tight fit, and it would take some very creative design to make that a 25,000 square foot library work on that site. So I don't see the current site being seriously considered for a new library there. So I think we are looking at other sites for the new Alpharetta library, yes.
Thank you.
Julie?
One, John, thank you very much. Having participated in some of those early citizen town hall meetings, if you will, obviously citizen input has been extremely important and continues to be, and you're to be commended for a great job, so thank you. I want to say thank you also for the fact that you made it very clear that there will be no prototypes. For those in Milton that love our uniqueness, obviously that doesn't stop with design of building. So a request would be that even before those RFPs go out to architects, et cetera, whether it be our design review board or our staff, any input that we could provide that would help that to be Milton specific. Obviously we have overlays and things of that nature that we would love to see Fulton County and the library board consider. I'll just make that request of you now because we've seen some great success with the Board of Education embracing that. And obviously Fulton County with fire stations have been willing to do that in the past. So we look forward to the library in Milton being unique in many ways. So just thank you for that in advance.
Sure. And I think it'll be a more successful library if we do respond to the community, and even in design as well.
And just one other quick thought or question really is in terms of site selection, I know that there's still a process underway. Do you have a time frame that's any more definitive in terms of when you imagine that period kind of closing more officially in terms of when it will be narrowed down and decided upon?
We really don't at this point, though. As we get closer to the end of the calendar year, I hope we start developing recommendations for our board.
But again, that could be end of this fiscal year or end of this calendar year.
Calendar year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for your time, John.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, let's move on to our first presentation. Will the city clerk please sound the item?
Agenda item number 09915, approval of an ordinance amending the rules of procedure for the city council meetings and public hearings for the city of Milton.
Do I have a motion and a second?
I move to approve agenda item number 0. Oh, this is first presentation?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I move to approve the first presentation item.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Tartt, second by Councilmember Hewitt.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Okay, there's no zoning agenda, so we'll move on to unfinished business. Will the city clerk please sound the next item?
Approval of an ordinance authorizing the exchange of easements on the Crabapple Community Center property, item number 09907. Mr. Carter Lucas.
Thank you. Back in January of this year, staff was directed to do an existing condition survey of the Crabapple Crossings property that we own. Two reasons for that, I think. One was to get an idea about the property itself and the existing encumbrances that may be on that property, as well as to look at the potential relocation of an existing access easement that is on the property to really more accurately reflect how that access access is actually granted on the property. So that survey was completed, and I've got it on the screen here. I'll try to kind of walk you through it a little bit. The existing building sits here. You have Broadwell Road, mid-Broadwell back here, and the Crabapple intersection sits right there. So the existing easement on the property now that accesses the adjacent property runs right through that existing specimen oak tree. And so the thought was to more accurately represent that easement with the access that's out there, which would move that easement along those dotted lines there. A little bit shaky from that far away, but. And so the easement is really a one-for-one swap. It's about a little over 2,100 square feet on the existing easement. The proposed easement would be almost exactly the same. So the easement that's being presented tonight covers the exact same area as the existing one, but really reflects where the access to that adjoining property is. The property also has an existing parking easement for the adjacent site on the north end, and an existing sewer easement that runs from that property as well as from the adjacent property down through there. On the south end of the property, there's an existing access easement for proposed road on the south side of the property. So the ordinance you have tonight really relates to the relocation of that existing access easement from that point down to this point. That's it, if there are any questions.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Lucas?
Question, how,
Tina?
thank you. As far as the owners of the properties, have they, you guys have sat down and talked, I know that sounds absurd for me to even ask, but, and everybody's in agreement with this exchange?
Well, I think the final review of the easement location is going to be presented to them pending evaluation by council. So any input from council tonight, if it goes as is, it will then be presented to the adjoining property owners. There have been discussions with them in general to review the location and how that would be laid out, but no, they have not seen the final document as of yet.
Does this, then, let me rephrase it and ask, does this sound as though something that they're going to support, that this is going to meet everybody's
Yes, ma'am.
approval?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, any other questions? Julie?
Thank you, Mayor. One, and I know that Mr. Lucas and I talked briefly about this when it was under first presentation, but just to verify, if you can confirm that this particular swap, if you will, is not going to negatively impact the access for citizens to the city-owned property that's also adjacent to this easement. Can you just confirm that?
That's correct.
So the land that's there, we're not giving away any opportunity for citizens to otherwise access this property, and we always have that opportunity to adjust it if necessary.
That's correct.
Since we don't, and the reason being, we don't really know what we're going to do yet with the Crabapple Community House, and so my inquiry was to make sure that we weren't making a decision tonight that would negatively impact something in the future that we don't yet know in terms of what it's going to be.
That's right.
And if I heard you correctly, I want to also verify just that this, again, swap of easements will not negatively impact those specimen trees, but instead would hopefully help to enhance the longevity of those trees. Is that accurate?
It doesn't negatively impact them. I mean, it really reflects the way access is today.
Right.
So it's, unless we do something else to the trees, I mean, it doesn't positively impact them either.
Well, I knew that the city had gone and had tried to put some tree save areas and some improvements in, and so I just wanted to make sure that this was not negating those earlier efforts by staff. It was.
It's not.
Chris, you might. Yeah. So in other words, it's in concert with those earlier attempts to make sure that we save some of those specimen trees that are on and adjacent to the city-owned property.
That's right. And the fence that was installed is shown on the easement on the screen right there. That's the location of that existing fence out there.
And then just my final question, and it leverages the the point that Councilperson DeVerson mentioned, that being that the earlier easements that were agreed to legally with another property owner, I'm assuming that this does not infringe on those earlier decisions and that those property rights are protected for those other property owners. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Do I have a motion and a second?
Mr. Mayor, make a motion to approve an ordinance authorizing the exchange of easements on the Crabapple Community Center property, agenda item number 090907.
I'll second the motion.
Motion by Councilmember Lusk, a second by Councilmember Bailey. Is there any discussion from the council on this? Hearing none.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Okay, let's move on to new business. Will the city clerk please sound the items?
Approval of a resolution for mayor and city council to approve and sign a memorandum of understanding between the Georgia Department of Transportation and the Fulton County Board of Education for the Georgia Safe Routes to School projects. Item number 09916. Mr. Carter Lucas.
Well, the city of Milton was fortunate enough to be selected under the Safe Routes to School project to receive up to $500,000 in funding to construct a number of projects intended to improve pedestrian and bicycle traffic to the schools. The city had identified 11 projects under that grant and was awarded that. This agreement is an agreement with Georgia DOT to begin that process. The process will begin with a design and conceptual plan development for those projects. And what will really happen through that is, of our 11 projects, they'll work their way down through that project list. We've estimated that project list to be about $496,000. And if we can get all those done for the $500,000, which is the cap on those grants, we certainly will. We'll get as far down that list as we can. So this agreement is one that's a little bit unusual in that it's a 100% grant. And once we sign this agreement, we'll be working with GDOT and their consultant, Kimley Horn, on that to work through that process, and they'll provide all of the design and the construction dollars for that. The only obligation on behalf of the city's part will be to certify that these projects are within right-of-way already owned by the city, which we have evaluated to this point and to the best of our knowledge so far. That is true. And so if there are any other questions on this particular project, I'd be happy to answer them.
Is there any questions, Bill?
Carter, perhaps you could clarify the grant and the design fees. Are the design fees included in the $500,000?
No, sir. Those are provided as part of the overall project. So the $500,000 is construction dollars.
Super. Good deal.
Karen?
It is.
Just one question, because I know we're going to be asked. In fact, I've already been asked by constituents, is when do we really expect to see sidewalks being poured? I mean, is this something that we think within the next 4 to 5 months we can actually start working on it, or is this a year
No,
to
ma'am.
2 years? Or
Anytime you use the federal dollars, you go through their procurement and construction process. So you have all the environmental studies that are required as part of that. So I would expect that construction would probably begin prior to next school year or during next school year, but not this one.
so it might be some of the construction could be done next summer
Yes, ma'am.
adjacent to the schools.
Especially when we're talking about those, the flashers and some of the raised crosswalks, things like that, probably be sooner. But all of those still go through the environmental process. So you're probably about a year out on construction.
Okay. Julie?
Thank you, Mayor. Quick question, Mr. Lucas. In terms of coordination on the design, and I realize that the design will be provided through GDOT, but given that there is coordination that might be helpful from our Bike and Pedestrian Committee, I just wondered, especially on those that happen to be a trail or a system as part of the sidewalk network that's not a traditional sidewalk, i.e. that which is not concrete, is that process going to be managed through your office, through our staff, or will there be opportunities for that Bike and Ped Committee at least to provide input to ensure that where we have the dollars to be spent for connections within that trail network, that we're ensured that we're actually coordinating where we can?
Well, we've been the coordinating office so far, so I would expect that that would continue. Where we can provide those connections and coordination, we certainly will. The projects have been fairly well identified at this point, and so any input that they have had up to this point will be included. And we can certainly, where those opportunities come up, include that committee for input.
And I think the key is that within those 11, I know that even before they were finalized, there were some modifications made because some of the projects had at one time identified concrete when in fact, according to the trail system, it was really supposed to be an alternative approach. And so I do believe that of those 11 projects, that was identified, hopefully correctly.
Right.
My suggestion is just proactively from the get-go, perhaps to have a communication with the Bike and Ped Committee so that as those 11 begin to be checked off or anticipated for progress, that we ensure that we've communicated well in advance before dollars actually get expended so we don't miss an opportunity.
Well, we can certainly do that, and I think how that coordination comes down between the city and the consultant, Kimley Horn, for GDOT really has yet to be determined and will probably play out during the process.
Thank you. I appreciate you considering that.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay.
Mayor, if there are no other questions, I'll make a motion to approve agenda item number 09-916, approval of a resolution for mayor and city council to approve and sign a memorandum of understanding between the Georgia Department of Transportation and the Fulton County Board of Education for the Georgia Safe Routes to School projects.
I'll second the motion.
A motion by Councilmember Thurman, second by Councilmember Bailey. Any discussion? Hearing none.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
City Clerk, please sound the next item.
Next item is approval of a resolution to adopt the 2008-2018 Solid Waste Management Plan, item number 09917. Mr. Carter Lucas.
Sorry, get organized here. This is a resolution to adopt our 2008-2018 Solid Waste Management Plan. This plan has been in process for quite some time, has had a number of public hearings as well as input from the committee. The Solid Waste Management Plan is really lays out the city's goals and objectives for their solid waste program for the next 10 years. The plan as presented tonight is one that has been through our public hearings as well as most recently been through reviews by ARC and DCA. It has come back here in the last month that it has been approved through DCA and subject to approval from the city via this resolution tonight. If there's any specific questions on the program, I'd be happy to answer those, as well as we have representatives from the consulting group who put the plan together if there are specific questions or historical questions that I may not be able to answer.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Lucas? Consultants, Julie?
Yes, one quick question. Knowing that we had reviewed some of this obviously previously, and we also had a TERRA committee that had been involved, can we just confirm that this is the same draft document that was the last draft document that the chair and that committee had reviewed? And the reason for the question is I think that the chair may have reviewed it and identified a few edits that they as a committee had thought were going to be part of this. I don't believe that it changes the need to approve it this evening, but just out of consideration for that committee, I just wanted to make sure that we were looking at a draft that in fact was the final out of that committee.
Well, it's the final out of the committee with any changes or amendments that would have been required through our DCA review.
Okay.
And so there were comments and things that we gathered through that process that had to be addressed.
Okay.
And so there are changes to this document based on those reviews. So.
Okay, so any changes that the committee might have identified that they weren't aware of would have come directly then based on that DCA review?
That would be my first guess. I don't know that I can say that specifically, but yes, ma'am, that would most likely be the location of changes.
And speaking with our city manager, I think that there's really not an issue with it because I think some of those edits are relatively minor. Just a suggestion beyond this evening would be if there's an opportunity later, not that we are driving that opportunity, if there's a need, I should say, for any other changes or updates, that at that time we just make sure that any of the edits that have been identified prior to this evening if they could be, that those be incorporated at that time.
Yes, ma'am. And the document is open for revision at any point by the city, either through a minor revision or a major revision process. So it's by no means a set document. So if we feel the need to revise it.
Right?
That's right.
Okay, is there any other questions? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion and a second?
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the resolution to adopt the 2008 through 2018 Solid Waste Management Plan, Agenda Item 09-917.
Second motion.
I have a motion by Councilmember Tartt, second by Councilmember Lusk. Any other council discussion? Hearing none.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Clerk, please sound the next item.
Approval of a change order for comprehensive plan community agenda with ECOS in the amount of, the agenda says $7,960. Item number 09918. Miss Alice Wakefield.
Before I get into the particulars of this change order, I want to say that what was passed out to you this evening was an amendment to the change order, increasing the amount from the $7,960 to $9,760. This is an increase of $1,800. This change order represents additional assistance that CPAC is requesting of ECOS. And those tasks include an additional CPAC meeting for the community facilitation synopsis, and that is tentatively scheduled for August the 31st. An additional public review for the community agenda, and that was the meeting that was held last week, basically August the 13th. Probably the most important task would be to complete the first draft of the community agenda and to attend the related CPAC meetings. The additional work which caused the increase, this came directly from the CPAC chairman, was to have ECOS to facilitate and attend the City Council work session for the community agenda, which is tentatively scheduled for sometime during the week of October the 26th. We had requested October the 26th, but there's a conflict, and the CPAC is looking over the schedule to identify some other dates. The next item would be to attend the public hearing for approval of transmittal to DCA, and that will be scheduled as staff proceeds along with CPAC in developing the community agenda. Again, the request is that this change order be approved in the amount of $9,760.
Mayor, I've got one more thing to add, just as the council's looking at this document that I think Bill probably caught it. He's shaking his head at me. We caught it on the first one. I'm not quite sure why we didn't catch it on this one, but that maximum fee under A, additional CPAC meeting for the community facilitation synopsis, is not $16,000. That maximum fee should read $1,600.
Okay, that's clarified. Any questions for staff on this change order? Karen?
I just wanted to confirm that this is all within our budget that we had originally set aside for the comprehensive plan.
Oh, yes. The current dollar amount that's remaining in that account is $127,000. With this and with the estimate cost for printing, there still probably should be over $100,000 remaining once the community agenda is complete.
We like that.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question on number 3, Alice, where it talks about the presentation of the content of CPAC. I'm assuming that it's more than just a presentation, that that'll be a interactive meeting, and that if CPAC then has suggestions based on that presentation, their input would then be incorporated into a revision.
Most definitely.
Okay,
yes.
and I know that may seem silly, but I wanted to make sure that was the process. Thank you.
I have a question. Chris, what do we do with the $100,000 that's left over? What are the remaining costs that will be funding once this is submitted to DCA?
Well, if there's any surplus of funds left, it through our budget process would roll into fund balance. It could be reallocated or could be transferred or assigned to a different project.
Can you foresee additional large sums that would be expended out of that 100,000?
Not for the community agenda.
Or even past that, what's the next step in the process that would take a large sum of the budget?
The only next step in the process, once it's accepted by DCA and approved by this body, would be to move forward with some of those implementation strategies, such as updating the Crabapple Master Plan, doing other small area master plans. That's the only thing that I can foresee.
Okay. Any more questions? If not, do I have a motion and a second?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the change order for comprehensive plan community agenda with ECOS in the amount of $9,760.
I'll second it.
A motion by Councilmember Hewitt, second by Councilmember D'Aversa. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
City Clerk, please sound the next item.
4 was removed by motion and vote. Moving to item number 5, which is the First Amendment to the Facility Use Agreement for Travel Teams Use of Bell Memorial Park. Item number 09920. Mr. City Manager.
Mayor and Council, I've got something that's going to be handed out to you here in a second. As you recall, we had several sessions where we talked about the need to possibly amend the travel agreement that we have for facility use at Bell Memorial Park as it relates to Hopewell Youth Association's scheduling of both recreation and travel teams. We were sent to come up with some type of an agreement that could be agreed upon if it was possible between both the city and the Hopewell Youth Association in the spirit of ensuring that recreational baseball players had first opportunity towards field space at Bell Memorial Park, and that if in fact registration, when it became an actual hard number that we could look at, if registration for recreation exceeded the demand or the facility space at Bell Memorial Park, that travel teams in that circumstance would be relocated somewhere else to play, not necessarily in Milton, but somewhere else to play. This amendment has been reviewed by the Attorney's Office. It's been reviewed by representatives of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, as well as representatives of the Hopewell Youth Association, and seems to accomplish the mutual ground that we were trying to get to. The item that I just forwarded to you right now has a couple of recommended modifications in it. One is the red sentence in the middle that basically allows the city to participate in the registration process. I think that's actually an added benefit to not only the city but also the Hopewell Youth Association, that when the registration process is done, it will not any longer be the come and explain to us what happened during registration. I think it's important that if we're going to be in this partnership that we have participation during the entire registration process. The second thing that's added is just simply a clause that says, and it's more just cleaning it up than anything, that the other terms of the travel agreement remain in full force and effect, subject to the above mentioned modifications. I know there were some questions as to whether or not the agreement in its entirety remained in effect, and this was just a modification to it, and that is just simply a sentence that allows that to not be a question any longer. In summary, what this does is it allows us to review around February 15th, no later than February 15th, the actual and real-time recreational baseball registrations. And if, in fact, there is more demand for recreational baseball than there is travel baseball, it forces the responsibility to the Hopewell Youth Association to find an alternative location for those travel teams to play. I don't want to draw this out any longer than it needs to be. I think this is an agreement that gets us to where we were hoping to be, and one that both the Parks and Rec Board as well as HY as well as the city can come to agreement that it brings to closure some of the questions that we had at a previous meeting. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I just want to confirm with Chris, as you've said, and we've discussed, make sure that all parties involved are on board with this and moving forward. Okay. Any
Absolutely,
questions
yes.
for Chris on this? Julie?
Just quick clarification, and I think I'm understanding it correctly, but the insert that you just handed us that talks about the registration process, that would both be pre-registration as well as that post-evaluation?
Yes, yeah, it sure would be. It puts the city in an active role in working with HYA during the registration process to not only understand how it occurs, but also not to have to play catch-up when it's over.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, do we have any public comment on that?
Yes, sir. Mr. Scott Zakowski.
Scott Stahusky, 3154 Chippingwood Court, Milton, Georgia. Today I come to front of you, Mayor, Council, and staff as Vice President of Hopewell Youth Association. As Chris so eloquently put it, I won't repeat all his words. This was the result of the direction that you all gave us at the July 20th meeting, a couple more meetings that we had to come to closure on baseball so that we can play ball and move forward. And I'm very happy and confident the work that's gone into it on behalf of the Parks and Rec Board and the Hopewell Youth Association and the city to make this all happen. So I appreciate your support of this contract amendment.
Thanks, sir. Okay. If there's no more questions, do I have a motion and a second?
I'd like to make a motion, Mayor, to approve the First Amendment to our facility use agreement for travel teams and use of Bell Memorial Park, agenda item number 09-920.
Second. I have a motion by Councilmember Diaversa, second by Councilmember Tartt. Any more discussion? Hearing none.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Okay, I'm going to move on to council reports. Do I have any reports from council?
Can I make a comment? It's not
Go
really a
ahead.
report, but I sometimes circulate information to constituents that ask me questions about things that are going on within the city that maybe aren't able to attend our meetings. And we had some information about a year ago and even 6 months ago that we were going to have a traffic signalization placed at the intersection of Deerfield and Highway 9. And the city manager has confirmed for me that, and Mr. Lucas, that that's going to be a little longer than September 1st, which we originally thought that it was going to be placed there. It's desperately needed. And we're under the, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but under the unfortunate no budget rule for the state of Georgia that the DOT has extended that, so we're probably not going to see that happen until January, maybe January 1st, possibly?
Well, it's not the fact that GDOT extended it. GDOT had to approve the permit. Once the permit was approved, the developer is then responsible for installing the signal. The long lead time on that is ordering the decorative mast arms that are required at that intersection. So what pushes that out is he's been told it's probably a 16 to 20 week lead time before those types of materials even come in. So we're anticipating getting a final schedule when his bids come back in here middle of August within the next week or two on what those lead times actually are.
Now, so what was the process for the permit being approved? If the permit, if the development's already been put in, the permit was approved, at what point, for him to go ahead and place that order?
The permit was approved probably 2 to 3 weeks ago.
Really? So why was that such a long, lead time?
Boy, I wish I could tell you. I'm sorry, but
And there's nothing that we can do to push that along, I should say, because, it is very, it's dangerous. We've got a lot of pedestrians now on Highway 9, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but my challenge is nearly every night, myself and lots of others are out there, and there's just no way to get back and forth on that. And there's lots of kids, and they're crossing there to go down to Hopewell Middle School, and some of them even to Cogburn Woods at this point.
that approval process through the Department of Transportation just goes through so many different hands, and it's really kind of subject to their workload and their availability at the time they're reviewing it. So I recognize that it was a long, drawn-out process, and I wish we could have had something that we could have done to speed that up.
And I know it's not the city, that has held up, everything. I guess I'm asking, is there anything that the city can now do, or that the developer can now do, since the permit's been approved, or is there anything that we can do to push that time up? what, beg, borrow, and plead? Is that what you said?
It's unfortunately now we're with these decorative mast arms. I don't think we like the other option, which is to buy stock mast
No,
arms.
no,
So I don't
no.
think we like that option. That would certainly speed it up, but that's what has been relayed to me is the length at this point, the 16 to 20 weeks, is to get the style of mast arm that has been approved for that particular
Is
intersection.
there anything that can be done in the meantime to have some sort of a signalization there that's not the final signalization? Again, and Councilmember Zonner Bailey was with me last night. How long did it take us on a Sunday night at 8 o'clock in the evening to cross that pathway? I mean,
And even then, not safely.
I'll just, and I'll confirm too. I, talked to the developer about that and had citizen questions, and unfortunately, the developer was working in good faith, and once the permit and, the 16 to 20 weeks is not a real long lead item in that type of.
no, I know it's the DOT. I guess I
And it would
hate
be
to.
very expensive to try to do something temporarily. I would think so. I don't know that you could
It would almost
feasibly
be
do that.
doing it twice
Okay.
in order to get those poles up, temporary poles up, back down, new ones installed. There's not much that would be salvageable out of that. Maybe the controller and some of the controls, but it would be an expensive option on their part.
Well, I know y'all will push if you can. Even a week sooner would be better than.
And I think the point is well taken, that obviously anything we can do from the city side, it would be beneficial for our citizens.
All right.
Any other
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
council reports? Okay, move on to staff reports. Our city manager.
Just a couple tonight, Mayor and Council. Budget is in full swing. This is our last meeting before we get together in September. And on the first meeting in September, you will see the budget and first presentation. So a lot of work between now and then will be focused on finalizing the budget document and getting it to where it's in a position that it can come forward to you on both of the meetings in September. Reminder that the first meeting in September is on Wednesday, since the first Monday falls on a holiday. Just a reminder that that's when we will be back together. I want to talk briefly about an email I got from Councilmember Tart this morning that I promised I would bring up in staff reports tonight as it relates to some of our trees that are on the property at the Crabapple Community House. We have an opinion from an arborist, I guess, that is one of Councilmember Tart's appointees to a committee, as well as somebody that has approached me that indicate that in his opinion there is some need to provide some type of health remedy to these trees, whether it's in the form of root injections or other fertilization options. I have received some quotes for that type of activity. I had never figured out what it costs to put root injections in the ground, and I now know that it's not a cheap proposition. And that's why I'm just bringing it out as an idea at this point to the council. It's not something that certainly is budgeted, and it's not something that I have authorized expenditure at this point, but the fix, at least in the first couple of quotes I got, was that in their professional opinion is that we were talking in the thousands of dollars to do something that would potentially proactively assist these trees. Now, I'm certainly no arborist, but I guess I throw that out there, and I've had a difficult time authorizing that type of expenditure in this type of budget time and this type of financial time. I guess I'm looking to see if there's any general discussion as to whether or not you want or have any interest in me pursuing that further. Obviously, there's some more work that would need to go down that we would need to do to be able to figure out exactly what we would do, but certainly engage our arborist and get some recommendations. But is that something that you would like more staff time committed to, I guess, at this point, or not?
I'll just open it up. Is there any discussion or interest from council on pursuing this any further?
I
Karen?
would like some opinions as far as, is this something that we're sure is going to save? I mean, I'm assuming we're talking about the big oak trees that are there.
We
Is
are.
this something that we feel comfortable is going to save the trees, or is it just going to save them for a year or two? I mean, you can't replace trees like that within 100 years. So if we need to spend $1,000 to keep them alive for another 20, 30 years, that's one thing. If we're spending $1,000 to keep them alive a year or two, that's
Okay.
different.
I'll get answers to that.
Julie?
Yes, sir, thank you. I do support spending a little to save a specimen tree, and those are several specimen trees. So I would support a little bit of additional time just to validate that the cost would be, one, the least expensive that we can find for the service, and that it would indeed have longevity as a part of it. Also, just the timing of when those injections occur. But I mean, there's obviously a lot of science out there about how to help the health of the root system of a tree. But it can't be that alone. Obviously, if we don't continue to keep tree save areas around it, we can do injections day in and day out for root systems, and it won't protect the tree. So I think it needs to be in concert with other things that have already been implemented. I also wanted to suggest that we have a tree fund whereby development that has occurred in Milton historically and also prior to Milton in unincorporated Fulton, where recompense has been legally required by developers. Not only could we perhaps use that fund for tree recompense and tree planting, perhaps we need to look within that fund to use it for the benefit of existing trees. So that may be an option from a budgetary perspective whereby we could look for $1,000. I think that the latest budget indicates we've got a balance of about $13,000 in a tree fund. I surely wouldn't suggest we use all of that, but if there's a little bit of that that we could use that would benefit those trees, it obviously benefits Crabapple to have specimen trees in the midst of that wonderful downtown historic area. So.
That's a good point. I'll clarify, Chris, what we talked about earlier. We're not just talking $1,000, though, are we?
It was in excess of it was in excess of $1,000. I'll have to check and see what even the requirements are for spending out of that tree fund, if it has to be in the form of recompense and planting new, or if it can be used in sustainability.
Maybe,
and health
maybe our city attorney could weigh in, but that
It
makes
sounds
an
like there's
option there.
enough of interest at this point that at least I need to do a little bit more work. So that was really what I kind of needed tonight, was to decide if this was a done issue or if you wanted some more work put to it. And I understand there's probably a little bit more work, which is fine. I think
Bill had a comment.
Is this a scope of work that Mark Law could expand upon?
That's exactly I'm going to give it to first thing tomorrow morning. So.
Okay. Any other questions?
And maybe you said this. Have you gotten an opinion from more than one, or is that what you're asking for? Do you need to get an opinion?
Yeah,
from more than one
I realized
arborist?
before we could expend any money, we need to obviously meet our purchasing policy, which is more than one. Although typically when you start to go get 3 of them, there's not one that is just greatly way out of the ballpark compared to the other 2. They're usually within kind of close proximity to each other, plus or minus $100 or 10% in this particular case. So, no, I absolutely have no idea what the ultimate expense would be, because we have just gotten an opinion at this point, and it was more a proactive opinion of somebody who happens to be one of our committee members who brought forward their own impression of what they saw as they were driving through Milton. So
there's also the tree at the Birmingham Fire Station as well. Yeah. Well, the good thing is I hear that we might have $100,000 left over from the CPAC fund that we don't want.
Right. It's all just a matter of prioritizing and what the correct expenditure of that $100,000 is. So I'll do a little bit more work into it, and I'll bring you back some more information.
Thank you.
One other quick comment. Just, I know that we've got a tree ordinance that's in draft stage that's continuing to be worked on. A suggestion would be that we think about tree maintenance, not just for these trees, but that we ensure we're thinking about tree maintenance for specimen trees, because as many of us have talked about, specimen trees also represent part of our historic preservation and historic heritage. So I really think we need an overall kind of approach. And policy may be too strong of a word, but I can just say that prior to us being a city, many of the developments, at least that I was involved with, Birmingham Crossroads being one of them, is that as part of those zonings, some of the requirements and conditions of zoning were that if there was going to be land disturbance, that the developer was required to help enhance the longevity of that tree by having an agreed to annual tree maintenance program in terms of injections and health, et cetera. So those may be some things that we could look at even beyond these existing trees. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any questions on that? I haven't seen anything else. Okay. Next item was moving into an executive session to discuss potential land acquisition and pending litigation. Do I have a motion and a second?
I move that we adjourn to executive session to discuss potential litigation and land acquisition.
I'll second it.
I have a motion motion by Councilmember Hewitt, second by Councilmember Hewitt, by Councilmember Lusk, I believe.
All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned into executive session. The time is 7:12.
I'd like to reconvene our meeting. Do I have a motion and a second that we reconvene?
I move to reconvene this meeting.
I'll second it.
I have a motion by Councilmember Bailey, second by Councilmember Thurman. I'd like to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Diaversa, second by Councilmember Thurman to adjourn the meeting.
All those in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned 7:47.